Again, this is our second, actually our third session. We had a nice session this morning, and they got a unique experience. George Watson, who's coming down here, is the uncle of Dennis McCarthy, who is going to turn this over to. And he's brought in his nephew in this chain of command for all these presentations. We had an excellent presentation this morning about forward thinking or thinking on your foot, or some people said maybe disobeying orders if necessary came, but all good stuff there. And today I'll let Dennis tell you what's going on. Dennis, by the way, for any of you who's attending for the first time, is our first vice president of the organization and is in charge of planning our educational forums this year. So Dennis, take it away.
One thing that got left out this morning, I kept trying to insert into the end of Brian's presentation, was the Distinguished Flying Cross that he got for his actions over Afghanistan. He just kept taking it out, so I'm going to put it back in. So, last year I had a get-together at my place up in Hidden Valley with my older brother Ed, brother George, my uncle George, and Brian. And the reason for the get-together was to taste various liquids. We had a lot of scotch. And also to see who was the biggest prevaricator. And we were been into drinking one afternoon, and Brian was talking about his unit, and Uncle George said, you know, I've been wondering about something. I need you to answer this question. Ask your question.
I said, Brian, how come we were in a tactical position and we need close air support? So we put in close air support, and Brian came back, the siblings are too low to fly, and suddenly the Germans came and strafed us. Oh, why was that, Brian?
I was a bit taken aback by that question. So the best answer I could muster at the time was, we know the Air Force wasn't established until 1947. That was the Army who was. But I told him I would go back and do a little research and see if I could come up with a better answer for just why that may have happened. And I think I might have a little bit better insight on why the Germans flew that day and the Allies did not. We'll get to that as we talk about this. So first I'll start out with a video to help defend the United States Air Force's Army and to provide a little motivation. Then we'll get into the brief. to this afternoon's academic session. We're going to talk about the evolution of close air support. Here's what we'll talk about today. We'll talk about actually what close air support is, or CAS, as you hear me refer to it quite a bit. We'll briefly talk about what close air support looked like in World War I. We'll spend a bit of time about close air support in World War II. We'll talk about the differences between the Allies and the Luftwaffe, their different approaches and how they prioritize close air support. We'll touch a little bit on close air support in Vietnam, and we'll talk about how we do it today, how we codify it, and then we'll have a little fun exercise at the end where we'll compare some of the weapons used in close air support for your generation and then what we do today. So next one will be on that. Okay, close air support. This is the definition out of today's joint pubs, which really codifies it, but it really hasn't changed throughout history. I'll let you read that. Highlight the big picture. Okay, close air support, or CAS. What makes it CAS is it's air action by fixed or rotary wing aircraft against hostile targets in close proximity, that's the key, to friendly ground forces. And in such a close proximity that detailed integration between the aircraft and the man on the ground is required. A, so the target is destroyed, and B, so friendlies are safe. It is not interdiction. Interdiction would be a P-47 flew over the front lines, flew over enemy lines, and took out German armor behind the battle lines that were reinforcing their units. That's not close air support, that's interdiction. Close air support is up close and personal, requires detailed integration between ground forces and the aircraft. Okay, World War I was the first time aircraft were used in combat. It was a new weapon. It was a more personal weapon for the guys in the trenches. Unlike the artillery that they couldn't see where it was coming from, they could see the aircraft that were strafing them. Initially, all the Allies, the Germans, the Brits and the French realized that the power of the aircraft it had in close air support. The Americans and the British had strafing missions for the Southwest Camels. They would run up and down the trenches and strafe. That was their close air support. They didn't really do any special training for it. There was no real coordination between the ground elements. But the Germans, and you'll see a tradition starting here, actually did develop some more sound tactics, more specific aircraft platforms, and more integration measures in World War I that allowed their close air support to be more effective. And in World War I, close air support was often more dangerous for the Allied pilots than it was for the individuals that were strafing, because think about how many rifles would be pointed at you as you run down the trench trying to strafe. So quite a few folks were lost. Slide, please. Okay, as we go into World War II, the concept of close air support became universally accepted, but it was prioritized differently depending upon who was doing it. The Allied, or the U.S. Army Air Force vision of air power, what they thought it really meant were these guys right down here, these big, beautiful bombers. It was all about strategic bombing. That was what the early pioneers, your Dewey's, your Curtis LeMays, your Trenchards, they all believed that the strategic bomber was going to be able to win the war. You didn't really need fighters, and that's how we could fight modern wars. Well, obviously they wanted to be proved wrong, but that philosophy, that mindset kind of stuck all throughout World War II. So a lot of cash was put in heavy bombers. We did have fighters, but the fighters' first mission was to escort these beauties. And eventually, by the time you gentlemen were in your offensive, your counteroffensive, close air support really became a priority for the Army Air Force. These are actually the priorities from Field Manual 100-20. You can read those. Obviously, first one, to gain air superiority, so bombers could fly. To prevent the movement of hostile troops and supplies into the theater of operations, that's pretty much interdiction. And then third priority, to participate in a combined effort of the air and ground forces in the battle area. That's as close as they get to saying close air support in the actual doctrine at that time. Maybe I'll talk about that when we get to the, I'm going to be a little more wedded to my notes because there's a lot of facts. I don't want to miss anything. So that was World War II. We did some close air support in North Africa. It did go very well at all force. But by the time of the Normandy invasion, the subsequent counteroffensive in the Ardennes, close air support became a little bit more effective from the Allied perspective. Slide, please. The Luftwaffe. Now, these guys, on the other hand, they made CAS a priority from the get-go, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it, because they're a continental power, offensively minded, blitzkrieg, fast-moving tactics, heavily coordinated between air and ground. So they took on a close air support mission early on, and they developed specific platforms and units to do that. That's where this machine came from right there, the Stuka. The JU-87 was specifically designed to be a close air support dive bomb. And they were much better at their integration between the man on the ground and the man in the airplane. They didn't get quite to the level we see today with terminal attack control, but it was much more advanced. They had specific air liaison detachments of aviators embedded in the Vermont units who could speak air power, work directly with the ground commander to maximize the effect. We didn't really start doing that until Vietnam. We did a little bit in the tail end of World War II, but it was only local innovative commanders who decided to send some aviators out in the field. So the Luftwaffe had the jump boats. Slide please. Okay, close air support in the 87th. What did you guys most likely see when you were over there? And again, this is where I was, anytime we're talking, if you have an anecdote, a story, there I was, or I say something is wrong, please wave your hand, we'll get you a mic, and you can make us all smarter. Sir.
I'm Dick Manchester, formerly with K-345, and the particular instance I remember, we had just embarked on what I presume was an advance toward the town of Morrissey, which I think everybody will remember, and during the Battle of the Bulge. And we were a typically well-organized infantry company preparing for, well, we weren't quite sure what it was, but we were gathered outside of an extensive woods, and down the road came some men from the 28th Division. They were being hotly pursued by the Germans. Now, you might remember that the 28th Division was one of the outfits that was initially attacked by the German force when they invaded Belgium. But this was a handful of men who were just simply fleeing. And the officer said, you know, we try to stand and fight, but every time we do, we're surrounded. So they passed through us, and we were a typically, well-organized infantry company. The company commander didn't have any gloves, so he borrowed some asbestos gloves from the heavy weapons platoon. The executive officer was so sick he could hardly stand up. He was sitting on a jeep and could barely move because he had the flu. And so we were all looking at each other and thinking, the Germans are coming down this road. I wonder exactly what we should do. So we organized. We're just prepared to start up this road and beat what we assumed were the Germans. And a P-47 flew over our heads and had just dropped a 500-pound bomb on the pursuing Germans. And so we all looked at each other and said, where did he come from? But there were no more Germans. And the second instance that I remember is that we enjoyed, which I thought was very good, close air support by the Air Force. There was a P-47 that I remember distinctly rather late in the war, who actually had the insignia of the 87th Infantry Division painted on the underside of his the fuselage of his plane. And I would see him up there, I wouldn't say every day, but maybe once every 2 or 3 days, and he would be just giving us close air support. And I thought, boy, there is a guy, because he even has our insignia painted on the bottom of his plane. And that's my experience with close air support. And I hope that mentioned what we call the grasshopper planes that were up constantly and suppressing German artillery fire.
I would like to hear that. Would I know anything about the grasshopper? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that's a picture of P-47s over Bastogne. And I found this, when I was doing my research, I found this this little bit of the fact about the 19th Tactical Air Command, which was under the command of General Otto Wayland, who utilized innovative tactics to support the rapid armor advance of General Patton's Third Army in the strife across France. Armed reconnaissance was a major feature of the 19th Tactical Air Command. Close air support and the rapid advance left Patton's southern flank open. Such was the close nature of cooperation between the Third Army and the 19th Tactical Air Command that Patton actually counted on the 19th to guard his flanks. This close air support from the 19th Tactical Air Command was thus undoubtedly a key factor in the rapid advance and success of Patton's Third Army. So the main mission that these guys would fly, squadrons like the 391st that I mentioned before, was armed reconnaissance. They would launch from their bases in France, and they moved forward with you guys, although not right there with you. They moved bases every couple weeks as more territory was taken. And they would load up. You can see this one's equipped with two 500-pounders and two rocket pods, one on each wing, and a full load of 50 caliber ammunition. And they will go out on armed reconnaissance missions to support gentlemen such as yourself. Slide, please. It wasn't designed to be a dive bomber like the Stuka, but it could. It was very fast and heavy, and it could do some successful dive bombing. The way they preferred to bomb was skip bombing, and that's how they would take out railway tunnels and rail cars. They would get real low, pickle off the bomb, as we saw it, pickle up, and actually skip the bomb with those targets. Later on in the war, a version of the P-51 Mustang was developed with dive brakes. Slats that would come out on the wing so it would slow down the dive. We never had quite the same level of dive bomber technology that the Luftwaffe. Yes. I have. That's beautiful airplane. I got some pictures at the end. Did you see any? Yeah, 9th Air Force flew like P-3011. Yeah, there's I have a picture of the airport. And some Mustangs. I love them all. But concentrate on the... So this is probably a view that some of you may have seen, P-47 streaking overhead. Maybe that's what it looked like after that 500-pounder was dropped. So that day, why did the Luftwaffe fly when the weather was too bad for us? I was looking back at history, and I believe that the weather was terrible up until December 23rd. I think that's when it finally broke. The Germans had already pushed forward with their advance, and I'm sure many of you know the actual history of the offensive was really Germany's last best attempt to save the Third Reich. So that's why they did that counteroffensive. The Luftwaffe at that time was a shell of what it used to be, and in all its glory, they lost all their best pilots. They still had thousands of aircraft, but compared to the Allies, they were vastly outnumbered. There was a lot of dissension in the ranks of the Luftwaffe. I don't know if you ever heard of the fighter pilot revolt. Within the Luftwaffe themselves, some of the fighter pilots thought the war was being run poorly. They didn't like the way Hitler was conducting his iron grasp on the Luftwaffe, and some of them actually revolted. It failed miserably. Many of them were executed. So the Luftwaffe wasn't doing so well. They weren't very experienced. They lost all their experience, and their equipment was down. So they had an operation called Operation Baseplate, which was the last major offensive the Luftwaffe accomplished. They flew a massive amount of sorties during the counteroffensive. It was very well planned, but poorly articulated. The pilots didn't know where they were going until they got to their aircraft. No one told the aircraft gunners, the German aircraft gunners, what was going on, so a lot of them shot down their own aircraft. So you had all this going on with the Luftwaffe and the counteroffensive. So my best guess as to why they chose to fly that day, while we sat on the ground to wait for better weather, is they were desperate. It was desperation. I wish I had a better answer to it, but that was their last best hope. And somebody probably told saw on the weather broke. Who was it that mentioned the contrails? Want to tell us what you saw that day?
Christmas Day, I was being transported up to Valley of the Boats. We stopped for dinner on that day, and the sky was literally covered with vapor trails. And where you look, there's massive vapor trails heading towards, I guess, an all-out offensive there.
Thank you. And actually, after the weather broke, even the strategic bombers, the B-24s, B-17s, everything was reallocated to stop the German offensive. So they stopped attacking the ball bearing factories and the oil facilities and the aircraft manufacturing plants. Everything went into this destruction of Germany's field of force. So a lot of close air support, a lot of interdiction, and that's what the contract was. Any other questions or any other inputs for what you guys saw close air support wise before we move on? Slide. All right, let's transition to Vietnam. Vietnam saw the advent of several new technologies in the close air support role, namely these ugly flying machines right here called helicopters. Just kidding. Initially, the Army integrated rotary wing assets to help support the infantry. Air cabs soon followed. These helicopters were armed for their own defense, and they found out, hey, these things are actually pretty useful on firefight. And it eventually elevated the helicopter to not just a sport role, but actual combat arms platform. And you saw things like the Cobra gunship being built, heavily armed Hueys. So organic rotary wing close air support became integral to the Army starting in Vietnam. We also saw the advent of forward air controllers and this OP-1 Bird Dog and then this OP-10 Bronco. Same way here in the Sandy. These are special Air Force pilots with special qualifications. You could go out and almost act as a coordinator, an airborne controller versus a guy on the ground. And then your typical fixed wing assets like your F-4 fan. Slides. Okay, modern close air support. Everything we do today in the Air Force is built off of what we've learned in the past. So a lot of the same things you see, that's an Apache Longbow helicopter for the Army. It's got 16 Hellfire missiles under its wing. And that's a radar on its rotor there. One of the Army's preferred organic close air support platforms. Probably the best CAS airplane ever developed, the A-10 Warthog. Thunderbolt II, the Thunderbolt, obviously the P-47. Fantastic close air support platform built around a big 30-millimeter gun in its nose. Very survivable. It's always been on the chopping block, but it's always come back. It's been a favorite of troops in Afghanistan. Fabulous close air support platform. The gunship up there, descended from the C-47 Spooky gunship. A great close air support platform. It's got 20-millimeter Gatling guns, 40-millimeter Bofors, 105-millimeter howitzer. Very lethal machine. Obviously, that's the F-15. Not originally designed as a close air support platform. That was designed to fly into Mother Russia low and fast, fight its way in, and maybe even drop a nuclear weapon. But the past 10 years, it's been doing close air support in Afghanistan. And believe it or not, the B-52 was a close air support asset in Afghanistan as well. You couple the B-52 with a bunch of GPS-guided munitions, and a man on the ground can do a lot of damage. Slide, please. Probably the biggest factor or feature of modern close air support is its jointness. And when I say joint, that's all the services come together. Right here is Joint Publication 3.09.3, close air support. This is the Department of Defense Bible for how we conduct close air support. So whether or not you're a Navy F-18, an Army helicopter, or a Air Force F-15, this is how we conduct business. We use standardized code words, standardized procedures, formations, so everybody's on the same shooter. Today in Afghanistan, there's essentially two types of close air support missions. They go out pre-planned and immediate. Pre-planned mission means it's scheduled. You're going to go out. You're going to be on call should anybody need close air support, or you'll go out on a armed reconnaissance mission similar to what the P-47 did in World War II. The other one is immediate CAS. Now, immediate CAS would be what happened. I told you about the last briefing. Somebody gets jumped and we get a JTAC, I'll tell you what that is, and a 9-line briefing. Next slide, please. This is the JTAC. This is the man on the ground, the Joint Terminal Attack Controller. He is a soldier. He could be a Marine. He could be a Navy SEAL. He could be an Airman. He could be an Aussie. He could be a Brit. But he has gone through the training to earn the title of the qualification of Joint Terminal Attack Controller. It is a certification that allows him to control the final aspects of a weapon. In fact, he can select the target, communicate with the aircraft, and authorize the release of weapons. Those were the guys we were talking to in Bagram that day. They have sophisticated radios with them, devices to guide laser-guided bombs should they need it. And they work right up and close and personal with the ground force commander. Normally, it could be anywhere from a platoon leader to a squad. And if that ground force commander needs effects, he grabs his JTAC and says, I need air here, and I want this target taken out. JTAC is the only way to make that happen. Slide, please. Okay, this is the way we do business today. I'll explain this. This is a typical flow. This is looking down from a God's eye view. We'll call this the target. Here's the friendly forces. And this is what we call the close air support wheel. This is the type of formation we will fly when we're looking to prosecute attack. So in this scenario, we have an enemy ground forces. We have 2 ships of F-15s, Tiger 1 and 2. They've just checked in on station. What they will do is they will orbit the target 5 to 10 miles away at an altitude of about 10 to 15,000 feet. That assumes there's no one down here shooting missiles at them. It's a fairly permissive environment. What we'll initially do is we'll make contact with the friendly forces. We'll pass them what's called a fighter to fact brief. We'll say, hey, this is Tiger 2. This is Tiger 1 and 2. We got 2 ships of F-15s. We got 1,000 rounds of 20 millimeter, 6 500-pound bombs, and enough gas to hang out with you for an hour. And then the ground force will acknowledge that. Make sure that we have the entire situation on what's going on the ground, and then they'll start passing us the 9 lines. At this point, this is a little window. This is what the Wizzo, the one in the backseat of the aircraft, he's looking to get his eyes on the friendly position on the target using his target slide, please. Once we're on station, we're checked in. The JTAC, once he has a target for us, he'll pass us what's called the 9-line briefing. This is a standardized format, and it can be used by any JTAC, regardless of service, to any platform that will work off of that same joint boat. It's called a 9-line briefing because it has 9 lines. And the JTAC will read all this information to the aircrew and then clear them for the attack. He won't actually say the numbers. Everybody knows what the numbers are, so if it goes in order, we know what the information is. First thing will be the initial point where they want us to start the attack from, then the attack heading, south to north to south, the distance from the initial point to the target elevation, the target description, the coordinates, very important if we're dropping a GPS-guided bomb, any type of marks if they're going to hit the target, smoke, very important location of the friendlies, and then what he wants us to do after the attack. Slide, please. So the 9 lines have been passed. The JTAC will clear Tiger 1 in hot, so he will roll out of the wheel, prosecute the attack against the target. Now that's a view of what the pilot sees out the front of his aircraft, heads up display, so you roll your foot orders on the target. Slide, please. Everything goes well, bad guys blow up, Tiger 1 goes offline, returns back to the wheel, and we will await additional tasking from the ground force commander via the JTAC. That, in a nutshell, is how we do CAS today. A lot of things can change that if it's not a what we call permissive environment. People are shooting missiles at us, we might have to stay further away from the target. That's essentially how the attack is prosecuted. Rule of thumb we like to hang our hat on. When we initially check in with the JTAC, we like to have bombs on target within about 3 minutes. So we go through all that. Hey, where are the good guys? Where are the bad guys? Pass us the 9 line. We want to have weapons put on target. Sometimes that makes a difference. Any questions? Okay. Tools of the trade, then and now. On the left, we have the wonderful P-47 Thunderbolt, and on the right, we have the F-15. Take a look at some of the numbers between these two beautiful machines. Slide, please. All right, the P-47, built in 1942. The Strike Eagle came into service in 1988. That's actually fairly old for aircraft. The average age of the F-15, I flew a couple years ago, about 24 years. They're getting a little long. T-47 was manufactured by Republic, McDonnell Douglas, and then Boeing for the F-15. That's another laser point. Okay, obviously the T-47 flown by a single pilot. The F-15E, we have 2 crew pilot and a Wizzo. Wingspan, fairly close. Almost 41 feet for the P-47, 43 feet for the F-15, but obviously the F-15 is much longer, it's at 64 feet. At the time, the P-47 was the heaviest and the most expensive fighter ever produced. And that was all World War II aircraft. Came in at 10,000 pounds empty. The Strike Eagle 35,000 pounds empty. Top speed, clear wind for the F-15 here at 600 and 1,650, where the P-47 is at 433. We don't cruise around at 1,600 miles an hour. We actually fly around about the same speed as these guys. We have the capability to go that fast. It's not the same out there. But the only time we really go supersonic is if we're at air-to-air engagement. Engine power for the double wasp engine for the P-47 for the 2,535 horsepower. We produce 58,000 pounds of thrust. I looked everywhere to come up with a formula to convert pounds of thrust to horsepower, and it just can't. Doesn't compute. Horsepower work over time. Jet engines just don't work there. Needless to say, that's probably several million horsepower for the double space. Service ceiling, actually fairly similar. The P-47 could get up to about 43,000 feet, and it was actually a fairly decent performer up at altitude in the air-to-air arena. That's why I like this airplane so much. It was a great air-to-air aircraft at altitude, and it was a devastating air-to-ground aircraft when it was down low. Much like the F-15, which was originally designed to be an air superiority fighter. When they made the strike version, it retained all its capability in the air-to-air environment, but it was also a very lethal air-to-ground machine as well, so very similar missions for the two of them. Combat range for the P-47 go 800 miles. For the F-15, about 1,100. Again, with advent of modern air-to-air refueling, that number really doesn't mean anything anymore. It's more about are their tankers airborne and what's the limitation. Clear wind for the F-15 here. The P-47 could carry a payload of 2,500 pounds, which is massive for the time. That's half of what a P-17 could carry. For a fighter, that was pretty impressive. And that usually consisted of 2,500 pounders of rockets and a full load gun, which we talked about earlier. F-15, however, can carry 23,000 pounds of ordnance. Here, I'm going to actually give a nod of a hat to the P-47. 8 Browning AN-M2 50 cals, 4 in each wing, with 3,400 rounds. Shot about 700 rounds per minute. That's a lot of lead going down range. And this was actually the weapon of choice, the close air support weapon of choice, the P-47 in European theater, as they got very up close and personal. With their targets. Modern technology. That never popped up in the P-47.
You wouldn't like that, right?
Yeah. In the F-15E, we have one 6-barrel Gatling gun. It's 20 millimeter, holds 510 rounds. We can fire it at two rates of fire of 4,000 rounds per minute, 6,000 rounds per minute. So it's about 5 seconds worth of trigger time. Doesn't last very long. But when you think about it, it's about the same. If you had 8 50 cals going off at 800 rounds per minute, it's really about the same amount of lead going down range. So. And our gun in the F-15 is not optimized for strafing. It's got a 2-degree up cam. It was designed to shoot down other airplanes. So when you're in a turn, you get your nose out front and shoot it down. But when you're strafing, you actually have to get even steeper than you want to be because your gun's pointed a little bit forward. So we have to strafe at very high angles. Not nearly as effective as the landing strip. Talk about the munitions. Here, another clear win for the P-47. 15,677 of them were made. Only 237 F-15. And there's the price difference window. 83 grand would have got you a P-47 in 1942. In 1988, would have cost 54 million. Buy yourself an F-15. So similar missions, different times. Still two very wonderful machines. Yes. It is. It can accelerate going straight up, but there's some caveats on that. In our configuration, we have to take off all our external fuel tanks. We have many bombs, things like that. The F-22 can do it fully loaded. Very powerful. Any other questions? Yes?
Is that all the F-15s or
Yeah, that's the E model. The C model, or the original F-15A, the single seat, they made about 700 or 800 of those. Many of those have been retired. They're still worthwhile. Being replaced by the F-22. The F-22, if you're interested, that's our latest, greatest fifth generation fighter. There's 183 of them. Slide, please. All right, just show you a couple pictures. Your P-38 pictures coming up here, so I promise you. This is a picture of the Air Force Heritage Flight. It's a demonstration team that travels around these active duty Air Force fighters with privately owned warbirds. They do the air show circuit. If you ever get a chance to see them fly, it's pretty impressive. So that's the Air Force demo F-15 with Tarky, O'Hal, P-47. Slide, please. That's a shot of P-47 doing night straight with all 8 Browning AM2s. See the tracers? Slide, please.
What ratio, 105?
You know, I don't know. It was probably something like that. I have to look that up. That would make sense to me. Here's another shot. There's the Thunderbolt, and there's Thunderbolt 2, P-47 and the A-10. Slide, please. There she is. Beautiful airplane, P-38. 38 plate. Slide, please. And the Mustang. Slide, please. And that's the last one of the heritage flight on the ramp. Slide. Okay. I'd like to open it up now and ask you, you've heard a few stories. What do you remember about close air support during World War II? We've heard some good stories and some not so good stories. It's great. Where P-47 saved the day, but other stories where they didn't show up. So I'd love to hear some anecdotes.
It was probably just about the time the ball started in the middle of December. I was on the German border, south of Germany, on the Saar Basin, and we were on a ridge overlooking probably the Saar River. It was in the woods. We heard a lot of noise down there, heavy machinery, probably tanks organizing everything. And all of a sudden, out there came P-47 straight from me. Things quieted down.
We got down on the Rhine River around March 22 or 3, and we got right down on the Rhine River. My platoon was down there, our platoon, Infantry 47, and we were taking 20 millimeter fire from across the river. It was coming right over our heads about as high as the ceiling. We were using tracers. Then they started to throw mortars at us. And I saw a P-51 take a dive on that gunner who was shooting at us. He made 2 dives. And that night at 1 o'clock, we crossed the Rhine River in those landing barges they used at Normandy. We got up there early in the morning. We went back along the river from across where we went. And I looked down the road, and there was the gunner with his gun dead in the street. So after that, the P-51 became my most favorite plane.
Anything else you saw from the Luftwaffe other than my Uncle George's war story? All right. I have one more quick video to show you. It's a video from the Heritage Flight, and we'll watch that, and then we'll enjoy the rest of the afternoon. So, yes?
Maybe before you do that, the JPAC now process that you have a very strict, precise process to make sure good guys don't get hurt, bad guys do.
Correct.
Back in World War II, how did these guys get their air support coordinated? I'm assuming it wasn't anything near as horrible. Who could call for air support?
You said you passed it up the chain, correct? Your air support request? You would pass it up your chain of command?
Yes, we requested from headquarters, the company headquarters, and then they were raided off to division, and then it went to the Air Force. That's how I understand it occurred. And that's why we went straight that day. I guess it took too damn long. Anyway, but I always remember the Russian high that cleared the air in the Battle of the Bulge. And I remember I was in the car and I was trying to warm my feet in the hay, and the building started to shake. And I said, what's going on? There's a tremendous roar outside. I went outside with my boots in hand. I looked up on one side as far as you could see. There were bombers, there were fighter planes, there were just about everything. It was black. The sky was black. And it went out and vibrated. Some of you might remember that. It was about the 23rd or something like that of December. And it was just a marvelous thing. We were just standing there. And when the Germans had their tanks in back of the woods, and you could see the bombers coming down, the P-38s and so forth and so on, they really leveled that area. And you know, we stood out there. Hey, boy, let's go! So it was a magic time for us. And I think that was a real critical time in the war. It really made a big difference when you knocked all that armor out. And of course, if you knock the armor out, you knock the ground troops out. So we just wanted to pile it on, but I never forget that phenomenon. Just looking, as far as you could see, every kind of aircraft that you could think, the British bombers, the land, so forth. And it was just mad. Yes.
I remember after we crossed the line, and we assembled, and I don't know, it was probably 2 days, and we jumped off, and we started out down the road on each side, and then it was a real bright sunny day, clear day, and we started walking, and we started hearing this noise. Rumbling noise. And we thought it was some German tanks ahead of us. We couldn't see. There wasn't an open shot down the road or something. And as we walked, and then somebody said, "Oh my God, look up in the sky." And it was a clear blue sky, and we turned around and looked, and there was just wall-to-wall vapor trails up there. And there was bombers going over. It was, yeah. And then we kind of, after they all left, and then we had to go and, yeah, and those guys won't go back on our sleeping sheets. And it was everything safe, and have a nice warm place to stay, but boy, we were rooting for you. Bill Allen, District 35 Field Artillery. I'm here to salute you guys in the front lines and tell your wives and children what you look like when you were relieved and came back through our field artillery position. If you can picture a person or a group of men walking along in a rather orderly manner, but not in a drill formation. But they had no expressions on their face. They were like this, walking along. They're relieved. They knew they'd be going back. They were worn out. And that's what you fellows look like when you came back through our lines. I salute you.
Did we have some people that were on some grasshoppers? Some light.
I expected somebody from the field artillery would talk about the L4 grasshoppers, we called it. They were always up in the air and directing our
divisions. If you'll read about that, you'll find a little description of that. I don't know how many divisions were doing that, but your division artillery commander, I believe that is
Any other comments?
When the planes would come down, the grasshoppers would come down, their cams covered, and I was near an artillery base at the time, and this Piper Cub, as we call it, came down, and this fella came on, he had a woman and cat on, and he went right over to this patch, and he took a piece of canvas, put some glue on it, went back to the tail. And the story comes out about the fellow who was actually taken from the group that I was with, and he was sent up as an observer because in the battle of the Bulge everything was chaos. And so we went up in the plane with this fellow, and they went down, and this pilot was kind of playboy, so to speak, and so forth. And he did strange things with the plane. And finally, they would come down the height of the tops of the trees, the tree level. And then he'd go through the loops in there looking for targets. And this fellow came down with him and he said, no more of that. And they said, you stay here with this group for 2 more days and so forth. And he did. And he said, I don't go over, say, get some protection. So he went over to the artillery, said, any pieces of metal. And he put the metal under the seat. And the guy said, it's a little plane. 2 bodies in here and a piece of metal like that? He said, I don't go unless you go. So anyway, he went up and he came down and then he pulled this piece of metal out. 3 direct hits on metal. So they were really daredevils. And this guy, by the way, he wasn't an officer. He was not a sergeant, he was a master sergeant, or in that category. And I remember maybe a platoon leader, a platoon sergeant, and so forth. But he came down with a piece of metal. That's it. I'm not going up again.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Any information on the new uranium projectile? Uranium is 9 times as heavy as the lead we had in the penetration characteristics.
Yeah, it's actually not new. The A-10 I showed you, that's its primary tank defeating rounds, depleted uranium rounds. Very low radioactive content, which is so massive, like it'll punch right through a tank. And they shot a lot of that stuff over in Afghanistan, and they shot a lot in Iraq. Believe it or not, a lot of the environmental groups are getting on the Air Force, asking when they're going to go to all the battlefields around the earth that they polluted with the depleted uranium rounds. Clean it all up. We haven't got back up on that. Any other questions? Can I see it? Do you have it? From anyone around?
That right, John? A lot of fun.
Heritage Flight is a totally unique program, and you got to remember we're talking about airplanes, and airplanes are flown by people, and we have to have ways of honoring the people who have flown them, who have defended the freedoms of the enjoy. And Heritage Flight is a way of kind of picking our hats to the people who have made extreme sacrifices for our country.
Being able to do this, it just reminds me on a daily basis that there's been those that have done this before before us. And now it's in my charge and the charge of my peers to continue on with that great tradition. And every time we go fly a modern combat sortie or a modern training sortie, whether or not we know it, we're representing those that have gone before us. And their same dedication and drive and willingness to go face danger, that rests now squarely on our shoulders and the current generation of fighters that you see. That's our responsibility now.
It is an important day, at least I see it, because I like the idea of looking at the past and learning the lessons that occurred back then in order to go forward. I think it would be beneficial for some people who send it together.
The program itself is bigger than any one entity, and its mission and what it was made for and what it's done, to me, is so significant and so important that was truly my most enjoyable part of being a demo pilot, was being a heritage flight pilot.
You want to link something, let's link the pilots. Let's link the F-22 pilot to myself flying the Mustang. When he's on my wing, flying a demonstration, he's not looking inside his cockpit at all that technology. He's got a stick in one hand and a throttle in the other hand. He's doing the same thing I'm doing. He's flying an airplane.
The heritage flight is one of the most amazing things that we get to do, because we can show that proud heritage that we have in the Air Force, 60 years worth of heritage of planes, and showcase and show the public this Air Force that's been keeping them safe for all that time. So to be a part of that is an honor. I mean, it's an absolute privilege for me to be a part of that.
For me, it captures the essence of these airplanes and what they were capable of, and the men that fly them, that flew in World War II and still honoring their legacy today.
Well, thanks for letting me come talk to you. It really was a privilege for me.
That's really the end of the program that we have.